I'm delighted to be joined by our special guests today. We have Marc Brackett, Founding Director of the Yale Center for Emotional Intelligence, Rebecca Soffer, Co-Founder of Modern Loss, Boaz Gaon, Founder and CEO of Wisdo, and Kathleen Entwistle, Private Wealth Advisor at Morgan Stanley Private Wealth Management, along with Jim McCann, who is our Chairman at Worth and very passionate about today's subject, the future of emotional and mental health. And Jim is also the founder of 1-800-Flowers. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having us.
Yeah.
Thanks for having us.
Our intention at Worth is to create conversations that help inspire and inform our community, many of whom are founders, investors, private business owners, and leaders who want to leave a positive impact on the world and help create a more inclusive and equal society and economy for the benefit of everyone. And we call this Worth Beyond Wealth. So we hope you find this session today enjoyable and valuable and thought-provoking. Forward thinking is the essence of this series, The Next Normal, where Worth is looking ahead to what the world looks like in this new environment that we're now all living in. It's clear that COVID-19 and the fight for racial justice and the losses and changes that many of us have had to endure over the past few months have taken their toll on us mentally and emotionally. So this session is really focused on how to cope with loss and protect your mental health, as well as become more emotionally intelligent in a time where change is a constant. So we're thrilled and delighted to have thought leaders and experts in this space with us today: Marc Brackett, Rebecca Soffer, Boaz Gaon, Kathleen Entwistle, and Jim McCann, to share their perspectives on mental and emotional health. So a few housekeeping rules just before we get started. This is a conversation and we really do welcome questions from you, our audience, our community. Attendees are muted on entry into this session. However, if you use the chat function, which is at the bottom of your screen, it's the chat symbol, you can type questions and comments to everyone in that, or directly to me, Juliet Scott-Croxford, and we'll weave them into the conversation as we go, if you prefer to stay anonymous, or we can also open up the questions so you can ask the questions directly to the speakers. So without further ado, Jim, I will hand it over to you.
Well, thanks, Juliet. You're right. This has been an area of interest to me for a long time. For those of you who don't know, I've only had two careers. The first was in the social services, and as a young man, I ran a home for teenage boys. And there are lots of mental health challenges there, as you'd expect. And my second career has been as a florist, and I've been doing that for a very long time. Those careers actually overlapped. But I would say that my interest in this area was piqued by an article I read back in December of 2018. It was in the Wall Street Journal, and it was written by two terrific young editors out of the Washington, D.C. office for the Wall Street Journal. A couple of people I've communicated with as a result of their writing, Janet Adamy and Paul Overberg, wrote a very, very insightful piece called The Loneliest Generation. And who were they talking about but me, my generation, boomers. And they wrote, it was one of those center of the front page stories at the bottom center that continued to 2 full pages inside. And it was a very thoughtful piece about how the boomers, us, were experiencing things as a generation that other generations had experienced before us. That is, this was the first generation that had a significant amount of people moving away from where they grew up for work reasons or just to relocate. So in large numbers, that was the first generation to do that. It's also the first generation to experience divorce in great numbers. And also, we're living longer. So sometimes we're outliving our families, and sometimes we're outliving our money. And then, of course, too, we're the generation that discovered and invented mass diabetes. So you factor all of those things in. People moved away, divorced, estranged from their family. 26% of them never married or divorced. 1 out of 6 boomers living alone. You factor in all those things, and their hypothesis was that the boomer generation was vying to be the loneliest generation ever. And the health consequences, as they pointed out in that article, were frankly enormous. But not to be outdone, millennials, Gen X's and Z's of all now fighting to get their fair share of the loneliness puzzle. And it's staggering to me. When you think of a third of people 45 or above claim in scientific surveys that they're lonely all the time. And when you look at, let's say, millennials, these are young people, and 22% of them say that they don't have a single friend. 27% say they have a couple of casual friends at best. And even that most connected generation, the Z generation, the kids who were born and grew up native digital, these people say they're lonely about a third of the time as well. And some of them say they don't have any friends. When I say some of them, up to 17, 18% say they don't have any friends. And these people are online and connected all the time. So, you know, I turn to our wonderful guest here today, Juliet, with some questions. And Marc, I'll turn to you first, if you don't mind. I know we met back in November at a Families Are Worth event out in the Half Moon Bay, and we've connected a few times since. And I'm intrigued by the work that you're doing, and I'm intrigued by your story. But what consequence is this loneliness epidemic, not just among boomers, but among all generations now, raising a hand saying, no, I'm lonelier than you? What's the consequence of that on mental health in general, and I suppose on physical health as well?
Yeah, I think it's a complicated question, right? Because it's like, why are you lonely? And, you know, it's like with an emotion, right? When you feel anger or shame, you really want to get at the underlying causes. And so I think the bigger question is for people to really unpack, A, the causes, you know, of their loneliness, and B, you know, what are they feelings? Because lonely is, you know, we wouldn't call it a feeling, right? It's an experience. So I think that's a critical question, because some people are lonely because they feel shame around interacting with people because of their appearance, or because of, you know, they have feelings about their loneliness, meaning, you know, I don't want to interact because I'm embarrassed about X, Y, or Z, or I feel badly, you know, about, you know, what I do for work, or that I don't have work. But we do know from research, you know, that there are major consequences of loneliness, you know, from immune system challenges to just prosperity. You know, that people who are chronically lonely have greater physical and mental health challenges. And so it's something we have to deal with. And there's a big difference between loneliness and being alone, right? Like I'm an introvert, so that's
important. That's important to come back to. I had a conversation with a friend recently, a very, very smart man. And we were talking about this loneliness subject, and I asked him, I'm sure even you have confronted that anxiety, that feeling. And he said, you know, I'm alone a lot, but I don't think I've ever been lonely. And I was knocked out by that. So what's the difference? Well,
aloneness is a choice, right? So like, I'm an introvert, you know, I like people a little bit, but just kidding. But you know, like I just prefer solitude. You know, I don't like to be in sports bars. It's too overstimulating for me. I like quiet places. I go to small restaurants. I hate big restaurants. The list goes on. And so aloneness is a choice. I choose to be alone. Loneliness, right, is a different psychological experience. Think about it. It has feelings of isolation. It could have feelings of exclusion. So it's much more layered.
And you mentioned shame, body shame and things like that. It seems to me shame is a very, very deleterious feeling that so many people deal with. But people in your profession do a lot to help people learn how to overcome shame, how to contain it, how to neutralize it. Is that something you work at? I know you do a lot of work with kids, and in your book, Permission to Feel, which I think paperback version's coming out pretty soon, isn't it?
It is, next week.
Yeah, we got the hardcover last year, and we gave it as a gift to a lot of people because, frankly, your work is a gift to people. So, do you work in that paperback book that's coming out? You talk about how people can deal with shame and contain it and understand it. The fact that you so comfortably talk about being an introvert and the consequences on that, That sounds so darn healthy to me.
Well, I mean, talking about being an introvert is one thing. In my book, I talk about being a kid who was a victim of sexual abuse, right? It's a little bit stronger.
All right, so you win. You just upped it again.
But I say that only because, it took me until I was 50 and a full professor to be public about my own story. And, there's a lot of feelings associated with that, both being lonely as a kid, not alone as a kid, but lonely with my emotions, right? Because when you're a kid who is a victim of abuse and you feel like you have nowhere to go with those feelings, the adults around you aren't prepared to listen because of their own issues. It's very lonely and isolating. And when it's coupled with shame, which is what I experienced for much of my childhood, it's like just double, the psychological toll, on your health and wellness. But I think for me, what's most important is that we move away from judging emotions as good or bad. Like, my experience was my experience. And right now, I know from the research I've done, we have chronic anxiety in our nation. I mean, I've done 15,000 people studies. Everyone is predominantly, anxiety is there. And we can have, I'm a man, I'm the director of a Center for Emotional Intelligence, right? Like, I can't be anxious. Well, I'm a mess, just and I'm okay with it, but that's the work, right? The work is not allowing the anxiety or the loneliness or whatever experiences to have the power over you. The work is to learn how to understand it, label it properly, find ways to express it, and then ultimately manage it in ways that help you achieve your well-being, achieve the relationship goals that you have. And so I can go on and on about this, but I'm sure our other colleagues have things they want to share.
Well, indeed they do, and I'm gonna turn to another fellow now. Boaz Gaon is a fellow I was introduced to last year, and I was describing to a board member friend of mine at Flowers. He was asking me, "Geez, in your wildest dreams, what would you like to do with the company?" And so I described the service that we didn't have that I thought would be terrific. And as I described the service to him, I said, "But we haven't gotten to it in all these years that I wanted to do it. So I hope I can find a company that's already got the skills to do it." And what I was describing is, Kathy, you and I had this conversation a while ago. Everybody wishes, Kathy as one of the premier wealth managers, advising families and founders and entrepreneurs all over the world. We were talking about the fact that one of the things that you do is plug people into one another in your network. You're a connector. And we all wish that we had someone we can go to that's been there and done that. Someone who already took their company public, someone already dealt with an adoption issue, from the macro business to the micro personal. We all wish we had someone we could talk to. And Kathy is a great connector of people. Wait a minute, I know someone who's a terrific person, who's been through that, who I'd love to introduce you to. And when you have that person you can talk to, it just helps. It's the young lady who comes home with her first baby. Everyone's around, they're excited, they're there to help. And then the mother-in-law goes home and all of a sudden she's there with the baby by herself. And she says, "Oh my goodness, what do I do?" And it wouldn't be great if she could pick up the phone or go online and have someone who's been there, done that, who she can connect to, build a relationship with, and sometimes just have a chance to talk. Right, Kath?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's, relationships are so important, and connections. Absolutely.
Well, this board member, a friend of mine, said to me, "I think I came across a company that was trying to do something just like that." And of course, it was Wisdo, and Boaz is the founder of that. And I got to meet Boaz and hear his story of how he lost his dad, and how he was, his dad is a very famous businessman in Israel, and he had started a company to do just that: connect people with other people in a non-professional environment, just so you had that reinforcing network. And now the technology allows that to be the case. Boaz, so we put on the 1-800-FLOWER site, Wisdo, and we're seeing amazing things happen when people with no obligation can just go on and find people who've walked in their shoes, who've been there and done that. Boaz, how is it? And I assume that this whole COVID accelerant, which is accelerating everything, the rise of e-commerce, the demise of place-based retail, it's working remotely. I bet it's in accelerating these emotional needs, isn't it, Boaz?
Absolutely. And you know, I think you described really succinctly how loneliness was an issue years ago, but what has happened since is that there's been an acceleration in what's been called the loneliness epidemic, even before COVID. And if you double click on that and try to understand why loneliness is so prevalent right now, leading to the work that we're doing together and how to counter that, one of the ways to define loneliness is the gap between the relationships that you have in your life and the relationships that you wish you'd have or wish you could acquire, but there's no bridge between what you have and the people that you would like to surround yourself with. And what's been happening over the past few generations, primarily with social networks, is that we've all been conditioned to connect to other people who are answered to two criteria, which have shown to increase loneliness, you know, instead of alleviate feelings of isolation. And those two criteria is one, people who are already in your social graph. So these are friends of friends of friends of friends that you would want to impress rather than confide in. And the second criteria is popularity. How many friends they have, how many likes they've gathered, how many followers they have. And what happens over time is that you get into a loop of continuously being judged and craving the feedback from people who you would like to impress. While when you're facing a significant life moment, and all of us on this call now, and all of the people listening to this conversation are going through a significant life transition right now, the people that you want to acquire to bridge the gap between where you are and the people you want in your life that would be able to alleviate loneliness is most often people who answer to three totally different set of criteria. One is people who can understand you and people who've been there, just like you said, Jim. People who would be able to say the magic words, "I've been there. I've been in your shoes. It's going to be okay." The second is people who are helpful. So people who are ranked by how helpful they've been to other people rather than by how popular, they're seen by other people in your vicinity.
And Boaz, these people are doing this altruistically, no?
Absolutely. They're doing it because there's nothing more satisfying than hearing someone who's a younger version of yourself saying, "Thank you. Thank you for doing that." And what we do is we are able to provide those type of matches. And with the work that we've done together, we were able to invite people to say, here's where I am. I've been through these following things, and they actually click. Been there, been there, been there, been there. And then there's
now.
and then I see that you played around with the app a little bit.
Not played.
And then the other is there now, like you said. And then the third onboard that we've added is, okay, you told us what you've been through. You told us where you are now. Maybe you'd like to share a little bit about where you want to get to.
Yeah.
And we gather all that data, and that is how we make the connections, building what we've fondly been calling the wisdom graph, complementing the social graph. And the last thing that I would say in this context is that we've seen loneliness reducing by about 70% within the first 2 weeks of using the product. While
so loneliness, people report that loneliness decreases as an issue by 70% after just 2 weeks of being on your app?
Yeah. There's a UCLA.
That's remarkable.
It is, and there's a UCLA standard where people are asked, in the past 7 days, how often have you felt isolated from others? And we were able to double the percentage of people who said that they've never or rarely felt isolated in the past week within the first 2 weeks of using the product. While the same type of study was done at the University of Pittsburgh 2 years ago with the bigger social networks, Facebook, Instagram, all these guys. And they showed that in the same time frame, using the same study question, loneliness doubled. And the younger you are, in fact, the quicker you're going to feel lonely and isolated from others. So hopefully what we've been able to do together and the work that we've been doing on Wisdo in the past few years is going to create a different way of matching people to other people online that would help them feel more socially supported.
It sounds like Boaz. Sorry, Jim. I was one quick.
Ahead.
It sounds like it has more to do with almost like the emptiness of Facebook, and so like there's no substance, like lack of substance, where this might have more substance to it. And also, I would imagine the mentors that are supposed to be supporting probably find what most of us find when we help other people, that it actually makes us also feel less lonely and like we're making an impact and rewarding us as well.
So one data point, I can provide a lot of data that would be very concerning to all of us here and won't surprise anyone on this call who's been looking at this field for a while now. But if there's one silver lining that we've seen in the data over the past 3, 4, 5 months, is that people who are happy and willing to step up and become what we call helpers and help other people has doubled.
Wow.
So people are opening up to the opportunity to be there for others, looking at their lives, reassessing their priorities, and you do see people coming together. Maybe that's one of the few good things that have happened over the past few months.
Boaz, besides the numbers, how many more people want to help? In answer to Kathy's question there, do you have data on how the people who are helping, how it changes their psyche, how it changes their emotional field?
Yes, absolutely. So people who are helpers are twice more likely to accomplish their goals. So we, once they submit their goals, we ask them 2 days into their time on the platform, then on a weekly basis, have you achieved your goals? So helpers are twice more likely to achieve their goals within the first month of using the product. Engagement rates are longer. Content consumption rates are longer. And an interesting fact, the more they help other people, the better they become at helping other people. And you see that in the reviews that they're getting for people that have helped. And once a newbie joins Wisdo, the pool of members that I would reach into to kind of find someone that they can chat with are the helpers. So over time, they get better at helping people. And it's a skill.
Well, there's a helper that should be working with you and the people on your platform every day. And Rebecca, we've had a chance to get to know one another a little bit and work together. And I think the work you're doing is quite remarkable. And frankly, if you were doing your work when Boaz lost his dad, he might not have felt the need to invent Wisdo. So we're glad you didn't know one another then. But Rebecca, you suffered a loss and a terrible loss of both your parents in a short period of time. You're a young adult, but you were feeling that you shouldn't have had the level of emotional grief that you were experiencing, the depth of the emotions while you were grieving there. And that caused you to start to do some research and say, there's no one effectively writing about how I feel, and maybe some work needs to be done here. So tell us a little bit about how that journey started for you and what is Modern Loss doing today?
Sure. Well, thank you for having me today. I really appreciate it. I think it's safe to say that there's no way I would be doing what I'm doing right now if it weren't for the hand of cards that I was dealt. I was very much on a journalism track, specifically a political satire track. And that's what I wanted to do with my life.
Let's disclose to the world that you not only are you a journalist, but you're also a producer, and that for 3 years you produced the Colbert Report.
Yes.
So talk about political satire. That, when people think political satire in modern times, that's the pinnacle.
Yep. I got paid a whole lot of nothing to do a lot of amazing work. So it was like one of the best times.
I've heard you talk about it in the past, and you said it was very intense.
Oh,
small
yes.
group of people, but really, really intense work.
Really intense, and we're still family to this day. Yeah, it was a really special time. So while I was there, my mother was killed in a car accident, and I had just turned 30, and I was in this stage of my life where I realized that, you know, like I had just turned 30, and in New York City, let's be honest, that's like 19, because you're still like living with all your college stuff. I still had my Jennifer convertible sofa from college. I still had all my hand-me-downs. I still felt kind of like a zygote that was like slowly emerging and like figuring out what she wanted to do when she grew up. And so I felt like I had all these life milestones ahead of me that I really wanted to hit. But at the same time, this like foundational rug had been yanked out from under my feet, which was the sudden death of my mom. And she was my best friend. She was my person. She was like the one I could let it all hang out with. She knew me. She could like level me with one very true word. And all of a sudden she wasn't in the world anymore. And I was in this stage of life where I still had to pay rent and go back to work, and work, like you said, it was intense. I was working in daily TV. I was working, you know, 80, 90 hours a week with no control. There wasn't a lot of control to like create space to consider what I was going through. It was just kind of all rolled up into my day. And the only time I really had silence was when I was at home in the middle of the night at 2 a.m, you know, eating like grilled cheese for the 20th time that week, and desperately searching online alone in bed. Like, this is like the saddest vignette ever that I'm painting. You know, like, how do I help myself? Because as somebody who is a professional and building their career, you know, in this like 20s to 40s range, building up your life, you realize that you don't actually have any natural groups to catch you. You're not like 15 years old and surrounded by guidance counselors or caring family members or anybody else who really kind of has a vested or legal interest in making sure that you're okay or on the right track. And you're not, you know, like 96 and surrounded by people who, you know, talking about loss and grief is like it's like what you do. Like, you look at the obits in the morning. That's what my dad used to do. And he used to say, as long as I'm not in there, it's a good day, right? And that's not what I was doing when I was 30. I was getting up and going to work. And so I really struggled with how to create space for what I was going through, because also I was surrounded by a lot of people who are my age and they couldn't relate to it. And the topic of loss and grief, you know, like you said, Jim, you know, maybe a mom has a baby and everyone's surrounding them and bringing casseroles and hugging and kissing. And then all of a sudden you're left to figure out how to do this thing. And I was left after the funeral, after the Shiva, after that mythical first month, where everyone assumed that was the hardest period of time. You know, it was like day 31, and I was twiddling my thumbs and figuring out, oh, like, what am I supposed to do now? What's the roadmap? Can someone just hand it to me? Because I'll do whatever I have to do, but I don't know what it is. And so it really was up to me. I feel like the bitter pill was, it was really up to me to figure out how to support myself and how to figure out how to grow in a post-traumatic way, and how to figure out how to be resilient.
It seems like your journey there with the work that you were doing, while self-therapeutic, it seemed to me at one point the light went on and said, well, if this is benefiting me to go down this path and to do this work, maybe I could share it with other people.
Exactly, because what I was finding at the time was a lot of clinical, I mean, I value research and data. I think it's the, you know, the bedrock of everything, but I'm not a researcher. I'm a storyteller. I'm a producer. Like, I'm a kibitzer. I want to commune with people and share stories. And so a lot of what I was finding online was a lot of clinical stuff, was like the DSM-4. I was self-diagnosing with like every malady under the sun, and I didn't have that. I just had grief, you know? And I found a lot of outlets that were kind of just, I don't know what else other word to use, but they were really cheesy and they were full of platitudes, and they were assuring me that, you know, it takes a year or they're in a better place. And I'm like, they're not. Like, it's kind of not a thing, you know, like it's better off if they're here with me. And all I wanted was to connect with someone just like Boaz. I wanted to connect with someone who was just in this mess and who could not just commiserate with me, but also show me, instead of just like put their hand on my shoulder and say, it takes a year. I mean, how is that helpful? You know, like, it doesn't take a year, by the way. It takes forever. You're always living with like this shade of gray. And so I wanted stories from other people who were at different points in this long arc of it to show me that it's okay if it's messy. It's okay if it's still messy in 10 years and 20 years, because you can also live a really rich life and you're not broken, and you can actually use this hand that you're dealt, not just, you know, in spite of, but maybe because of what you went through, you can live a really rich life. And so that's what modern loss came out of.
It's not just, modern loss isn't just for people who are going through that grieving process. I think what I saw in the book is, you're talking about people don't know what to do. It's awkward, right? Marc, it's people aren't sure what to say to someone who's had a loss. Boaz, you see this every day on Wisdo. People are looking for, what do I say? What do I do? And I think the work that you've done is uncovered and maybe put together a little bit of a roadmap to help people understand, how do I help people who are grieving? How do I help myself to interact appropriately with someone who's had a loss so that I'm comforting? Because that's what I want to do. I want to comfort them, but I'm not sure how to do that. And,
exactly.
And by the way, in these crazy times, rules have changed. I bet since the middle of March, I bet there's at least a half a dozen different deaths that I know of in my circle, our circle of friends and family, that we certainly would have gone to the service, but now there is no service. Mm-hmm. So it really challenges in terms of how to express ourselves. And I think the work that you've done and are doing, Rebecca, with a new book coming out, or that you just started anyway.
That's right.
It would be nice if you did that part of it.
Yeah.
There's good lessons for us all in there. Kathy, yeah. I would expect in your world, the same thing happens. You know, if you have clients, you're dealing with these families that have multi-generational family situations. I'm sure it's an awkward thing and yet an important thing for you to visit and to be able to be a resource for these clients of yours when there's a death in their family. And of course, you're dealing with the financial consequences, of course.
Yes.
But you have relationships.
No, it's relationships. It's interesting listening to all of this. First, Rebecca, I lost my mom and dad within 2 years of each other when I was in my 30s. We can talk offline.
Let's get a drink.
I'm going to get a call too if you don't mind.
And what I was going to say though is for the relationship piece, when we're working with our clients, I had one of my first clients was a retired fellow who was a crossing guard at my children's school. So I would take the kids to school and we got to know each other, and he and his wife became my clients and adored him. He said he was part of this group of guys called the Romeos, they called themselves. They were all in like World War, II or something like that, Korean War. He died about 15 years ago, but he got very sick and he would only see his family. Nobody could go see him. And then he asked to see me. And I kid you not, I held his hand. He grabbed my hand in the hospital and he said, "Please take care of my dear Peg." That's his wife. And it was just so touching. And it was such an emotional, bond and trust that it was really meaningful to me. And it really showed me how important what I do is. And Peg's still a client many years later, and I never forget. Every time I talk to her, I think of him and his ask of me, and I feel like I delivered on that. So that's like a big plus. From a financial standpoint and stress, I would say that the stress that has gone on, with COVID, it's accelerated stress with people because of the financial aspect. And so many people are worried about, are they going to keep their job, or how are they going to manage somebody getting ill? We did a lot of conversations around estate planning, which is a really tough topic to have, but do you have your healthcare proxies and your power of attorneys and everything? Because we didn't know what was going to happen in March and who was going to be able to make decisions. So it's really about understanding people, their humanity, and what's their priorities when it comes to those things that are important to them, and then supporting that. And there's nothing in the world more rewarding than making a positive impact on somebody, whether it's helping them understand how to feel their feelings, or to connect with, you did this and how can I get through it too, or to help them with their, with their overall wellness, financial picture, whatever it is.
Well, when it comes to overall wellness, Marc, so many of the conversations, the conversation today have been around relationships. How do you help, particularly you do so much work with kids, and we talk about this accelerant to COVID. Everyone's, we're doing this late in the summer, everyone's anxious about what happens with school. Mm-hmm. It's a consequence. You know what I worry about, Marc? I had a birthday the other day, And my
Congratulations.
daughter and her husband and 3 kids came over. We had dinner together, socially distant as could be, but it was so good to see the grandkids. But you know what my big threat to these kids, 11, 7, and 5, 11, 8, 5, was my big threat to them was, I'm going to hug you. And I'm sitting there after they left saying to my wife, I said, I wonder what consequence this is going to have on our relationships with our grandkids, as this is likely to last for some time. What do you think about in terms of relationship formation and our ability to learn and develop relationships when kids are isolated like this? I know that's been your life's work, so surely it's something you're working on every day.
Sure. I think, there's a question in the chat about, is loneliness a luxury? And I just think it's important to address it. I think aloneness is a luxury, not loneliness, because loneliness is a psychological construct and aloneness is not necessarily a psychological construct. And, there are many forms of loneliness. When you think about the structural racism in our society, there are many people living with imposter syndrome, which is a form of loneliness. There are people who are living with shame. It's another
Come
form
back
of loneliness.
What, imposter syndrome?
Yeah. So, imposter syndrome is, I'm not the classic example of it, but I'll just give you, I grew up with blue collar roots in New Jersey. My father was an air conditioning repairman. Now I work at an Ivy League, elitist institution. I don't really fit in where I work. I'm an anomaly. So, it's like you fake it.
But 90% of us feel that way, right?
Well, that's the thing, because it's psychological, right? And, I think we have to, it's a challenge, because it's what we call emotional labor, right? That you're putting on, a face, you're acting a lot so that you're accepted, but deep inside you feel like, I don't really belong here. There's something very different about me than everybody else. And so my, push is, I think that we have to think developmentally. And so in my own example of being a kid who was a victim of abuse, there were clear signals on my face, my body language, my vocal tones, the way I was interacting, that were just missed by every adult who was raising me and teaching me. And to this day, I still think back, like, how is it possible that people didn't see it? And I think it's because the adults who are raising us are preoccupied with their own stuff. My mother was dealing with her anxiety. My father was dealing with his anger. My teachers, probably were like, I don't know what to do about this kid. Like, he's awkward and he doesn't, I don't know if I should get involved, and it's not my job to, to interfere. And so what I'm going to say is that it is the adults who are raising and teaching kids responsibility, right, to understand children's lives. And if we don't do that, then we're going to have increased loneliness, increased isolation. Just to give you one example of a thing we do in schools, we ask teachers in grade levels to look at the roster of the kids that they work at grade level meetings. And we say, put a dot next to the kid that you feel you have a good relationship with. I put a dot next to a kid that, that they know they can go to you if they want to talk about something that's bothering them. And what we find is that there's about 50% of kids in our schools that don't have a dot. And so think about what it feels like to be a kid in a school who doesn't have an adult there who can support you. That's loneliness, right? That's not aloneness. And so it's exercises like that we want people to engage in, to really understand that it's not the kid's responsibility, right? Kids don't have to raise themselves. Kids need to be raised in a world where the adults are helping to shape their lives. So that's just one thing. And I think that's a really important thing. One last thing I'll just say about development is that as someone who worked as a consultant to these tech companies for many years in building systems to support things like bullying prevention on Facebook and others.
Yeah, well, I think that work is important. I think it would be, these companies are getting bashed lately, but I know Google and Facebook and a couple of others have reached out to you professionally and to your institute for help in preventing bullying. So as much as they get bashed, they are interested in doing the right thing.
They are. It's just, it's complicated to implement these systems. I think the thing that's interesting about the social media work that we were just talking about is that we perceive that being, on Instagram, on Facebook, on Twitter, on all these different social media, our minds are like, I'm connected. And when we do work with high school students in particular, we have them literally plot how they feel, not how they think they're going to feel, but how they actually feel. They realize they're actually more psychologically lonely and feel less positive emotions when they're engaging in it. But when we have them in real social interactions where they're with people and interacting, they feel many more pleasant emotions. So it's playing with our brains. Our brains are lying to us, basically. We're going to say, oh, I'm going to be connected. I'm going to be connected. I'm going to be connected. But in the end, we feel less connected.
All right, so we have social media as a fairly new phenomenon still to this day. Facebook's been around about 13, 14 years, I guess. It sounds like it's both good and evil in the sense that a benefit and a negative, in that it does keep people connected. But what I hear you saying, and Rebecca, I assume it's truth and same in your world that you work in every day. While they feel connected, it's a superficiality to it in some degree too. It's not that genuine connectedness that we'd like to see. Is that the case?
Actually, I disagree a little bit. I think social media is kind of a double-edged sword.
Well, I said it was good and bad.
Right, exactly. It's good and bad. No, right. I actually fully agree with you. So on the one hand, right, as you were saying, you can feel so disconnected, and so you can feel really lonely on social media because you're comparing yourself to everybody, especially even during this pandemic, who's at home and they're making these like beautiful sourdoughs, and you're just figuring out like if you're going to put deodorant on this morning, and like people are like weaving, and you're like, good, well done, that's great. And so I think that we just compare so frequently on social media because we just want to put this like filtered version of ourselves out there. But when it comes to like the flip side, what I have found with regard to creating community around loss and grief, and not just like that first year, but like living really well across the long arc of it, is that virtual connection can be as meaningful as in real life connection if you do it in the right way, if you do it mindfully and thoughtfully, if you do quality control and you encourage people to kind of create peer-to-peer support. So Modern Loss, for example, has seen, so we're active on Patreon. We have that's how we don't charge for our content. We have a lot of members who donate a small amount every month and give them benefits. And we saw a 60% growth in March and April alone during the onset of this pandemic. And it's not just people, actually very few of them were people who lost people to coronavirus. It's people who had been living with loss, who realized that like now that they're stuck at home and in their apartments, they are so lonely, they need community. And while I think that maybe in some ways social media and the internet will bring us all down, when it comes to this type of conversation, social media really allows you to be a member of a community without putting pressure on you to say anything. You can still feel like you're part of something meaningful, part of something resilient, part of something inspiring without even saying a word in a group, because you're still being exposed to people's mindsets and viewpoints and different cultural mores, and different people who have, just different advice to give. And so we're seeing that a lot on Modern Loss, which is, we're all over on Instagram, closed Facebook group, etc. And the engagement there is amazing because people are realizing that they can, with a very low touch experience, pull each other through this mucky experience and make it less lonely. And they can also use it as a very powerful tool. Like, I don't like the term empower yourself. I think we all have power, right? Yeah. So I think they're using the power that they have to share their stories, share their experiences, just like Boaz, you do with your company, and ask people to bear witness to what they're going through. And when you can do that and people respond, not only, it's really meaningful. If you post a picture of your mom or just a tough moment you're going through or just a memory, you feel less lonely. And sure, it can be like downing a packet of sugar. If it, like you just get a couple of likes, then you really need to do it more and more. But if people are really engaging with you, then you really feel like inspired to do it more and more and more. And then you might inspire somebody else to open up about their own experiences. And you can have a ripple effect on this like cultural stigma that we still have surrounding loss and grief. And I think by extension, we can really move the needle on this whole topic, which is still stigmatized in our culture for some ridiculous reason that I don't understand. So yeah, I'm behind social media when it comes to this stuff.
But,
I think,
but, you know, go ahead.
No, what I was going to say, I appreciate your perspective here, and I think there's intentionality. And so there's different intentionality when you're going through a loss and you intentionally join a group like what you're saying. Completely agree. And I've done some work with Facebook and others on these intentional groups as support groups, as ways of communicating. But I'm talking more developmentally. For example, a lot of teenagers are posting pictures of themselves on Instagram where they distort their faces, they make their hips smaller, they change their hair color, they change their skin tone. And they think when they're posting that, oh, I'm going to feel beautiful, or I'm going to feel people are going to like me better. But they realize there's this incongruence between like, that's not really me. And so it's that piece that I'm really talking about that's really, I think, damaging to kids' growth and development. But totally different usage.
Absolutely.
But Marc, you put programs in schools around the country that help young people in school and the professionals they work with in the educational environment to embrace the fact that they have feelings and they have needs and how to learn to feel. And so your book, Permission to Feel, manifests itself in different programs you put in school systems. So as a shout out to our audience, if you're involved in the educational system and you'd like to talk to Marc about his institute and the work they're doing and how school systems are embracing this capability and training the teachers and training the administrators to understand how to deal with the emotional needs and the emotional intelligence and the emotional development of their students. I think your work it's so good to see someone and a group that can do good and do well at the same time. So great
Appreciate
work there.
that. Just want
Kathy,
to say, it's the adults. Our work is, I care about kids primarily just because I'm a developmentalist and I want kids to be healthy and achieve their.
And you don't ever want to grow up yourself, I'm sure.
Well, I don't look 50, do I? But I think importantly, I just want to go back to, kids grow up, the adults are the first role models for kids. So like, for example, in our work, I was on the commission for New York City's, reopening schools, 1.1 million children, right? Many of whom are homeless, living in temporary housing. It's very, 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 very complicated. And we have teachers who have to put themselves at risk for, some of them have health risks. And so if we don't take care of the adults who are raising and teaching kids, the kids aren't going to do so well. So it's really not just kids or adults. It's really, we got to help everybody.
Marc, I had the benefit of not only meeting you in November, but also coming to the luncheon at the UN. I think that was in February. And it was really inspiring to see your work that you're doing in action and hear from these high school students, I think, right? High school students and teachers, and also the 4 colors and the moods that you went through not only that day, but also back at the Families of Worth event in November. So do you want to just share a little bit about that? Would that be okay, Jim? Just a quick overview of that.
Review of what? I'm sorry.
What you're doing, the actual work of the children coming into the schools and acknowledging those feelings and what the benefit of that is.
Well, in the spirit of shameless self-promotion, this is the inside of my book, and that's the mood meter tool. So it's just a tool that's based in research, a lot of science that just says, how we feel is a product of, our appraisal of the world around us. Do I want to approach, avoid? Do I feel safe, unsafe? And really what's going on in terms of our mental and physical energy. And then the question is, well, how do you change that into language? Because we can't just say I'm high energy and pleasant, right? We want to get language. And of course, I think a lot of the work, in supporting people to manage their feelings right now is about getting granular. So, a lot of us say we're stressed, but are you stressed? Or are you overwhelmed? Or are you anxious? Or are you angry? And what we find is that people are really not very good at differentiating their feelings. We have a lot of clumpers. We feel like crap or we feel fine. And it's because I think the question of how are you feeling is oftentimes taken very superficially. right? Fine, busy, let's move on. And that really depends upon whether the other person is going to listen, right? Do they care? If I said, Kathleen, ask me how I'm feeling.
How are you feeling, Marc?
Oh, this odd mixture of like anxiety and despair.
That means why?
Exactly. Like, and like you're like,
Kind
oh,
of
like
Kathy
is this
skidding tires, leaving the scene.
exactly like it's like, oh shit, can we hang up this webinar right now?
Not
And
true though. Yeah,
I
I
think
hear
that
you.
this is what happens with parents, right? Like my parents feel like my father, like my son is anxious and despair. He's supposed to be a tough guy like me. So what happens is that you grow up with these mindsets around feelings, and then you start suppressing them over the course of your development. And so we want to try to prevent all that from happening and help people have the permission to feel and also the language and the strategies to manage them effectively. So that's the
Juliet,
goal of our work.
Juliet, you've been managing a business through a crazy time here. As you listen to this, I would also guess this is, having a little 3-year-old at home. You and Dan not in your country of birth. I would expect that your anxiety level's been running high the last few months. Isolating, working from home, all the stresses that come about from that. Yet you also have to be this anchor, this pillar, this decision maker for a business. How have you been juggling those emotions?
Taking it day by day. Yeah, anxiety has just been a little bit higher. It's amazing hearing this conversation. Actually, it really does touch you, because if you're not living in the country of where your family are, and we're talking
Which
about,
means you're separated from your parents, and little Bucky's not seeing grandma and grandpa.
Yeah. And that's where I see things like social media as being an amazing tool to stay in contact and stay in touch with grandparents and parents.
So are you Zooming a lot?
Zooming a lot, yeah. FaceTime or WhatsApping at least once a week with family. And I think I'm struck by, I think at the start of the pandemic, and I think that we're all talking from positions of privilege, but I think, we all had to kind of go through quite intense moments personally and professionally, to whether it was to ensure our businesses were sustainable or to change tack on something we were doing. And I think it strikes me that a lot of people possibly haven't yet really thought about the trauma that they have just gone through and the sort of post-traumatic stress of the past 4 months. And I have this sense that that's going to catch up with people, and the aftershocks of this we haven't really sort of seen yet. And I have a sense that actually it's going to be more significant than perhaps we're noticing, and particularly with kids where they're going back to school. And Marc, you were talking about, they're both sort of excited, but also wanting to feel safe. And it's just quite they're both quite different feelings. And it's like, how do you create safe environments for our children? I feel like the benefit of Jessie going back to school next week far outweighs the risk of it, but equally you don't know, right?
But let the record be straightened out. His name is not Bucky. It's Jesse. But Juliet, I know you well. I know your personality, and so I'd ask you, as you've gone through this, and as you, the phrase you used at the very beginning about where we come from, a place of privilege, is very much the case, and we can't lose sight of that. But what are you hopeful about, Juliet? What is it? What gives you a sign of hope coming from this conversation, or even before?
I think that I certainly think this time has certainly made me and everyone that I'm close to really kind of reconnect with what's important, and you really do feel, I think, a sense of you're grounded in the things that are important and the connections and the relationships that you have. I've been certainly through the professional side of things, really struck by how much collaboration and partnerships have come into the forefront. And I think people are a lot more willing to talk and work together. And I think there's a sort of sense of compassion and collaboration that it is is really striking right now, and I'm hopeful that continues. I mean, there's so much going on in the world, but I think just having these conversations and having a space for these conversations is incredibly important. And I think it's refreshing having a conversation on mental health and emotional health in a working environment, right? Because that's unusual, and it still is quite unusual. So I feel hopeful about conversations like this and connections like this, because I think it will only help us drive towards a more sort of positive and less lonely place for people.
Rebecca, something you're hopeful about besides being able to write this next book?
Well, that will be courtesy of caffeine. It's sometimes so overwhelming. I mean, I have to throw my phone into a drawer like 10 times a day because I can't read the news. But I really feel, and I've felt this since March, that I am very, very, very hopeful that as we move through this, and as hopefully things eventually get better or get to another level of normal that is a little bit more palatable than the one we're living with now, is that we're all going to be more empathic. When my mom died and then my dad died a few years after she did, I always said to myself, I wish that I had just like a microchip that I could inject into this friend or this person or this boss, just so they understood for 2 seconds what it feels like to not understand anything about what tomorrow looks like or next year looks like, or like the next hour looks like, what it feels like to be so uncertain about your world and what you wanted it, because it's just completely unfamiliar now. And I feel like now we all get it because we all understand, every single one of us, I think, in the world has experienced loss and grief in the last several months. Grief over, sure, maybe a death loss, but grief over a future that we thought we were going to have, or a present that we thought we were going to have, or even just like the knowledge that we think our kids are going back to school in September. Everything is so uncertain now, and we are grieving so much. And I think that is making us, like Juliet said, more compassionate, maybe especially as colleagues, but as friends, as strangers. Some of my best friends are people I met after my parents died, when I was already an adult. And those are people who just got it, and they were really empathic, and they came out of the woodwork because of it. And I really, really believe that we're going to be better set up to support each other as a society as we move through this. I really believe it.
So you guys have made me more hopeful, and I'm thrilled that there's people like Boaz and doing the work he's doing at Wisdo, because is where these technology tools are being put to good use. And I'm thrilled to get to hang out with Kathy from time to time and see what a compassionate, thoughtful professional she is, and see the service she delivers to our client base with all the right intentions. Juliet, I hope we've finished on a high note, and I'll turn it back to you.
You really have. Thank you, Jim. And Rebecca, Marc, Boaz, and Kathy, thank you so much for such a open and compassionate and thoughtful conversation into mental and emotional health. And a special thanks again to Kathy for being our partner in this series. We will link to both Rebecca and Marc's books in the thank you note to the registration. So Rebecca's book is Modern Loss, Candid Conversation About Grief, Beginner's Welcome, and Permission to Feel by Marc. Most importantly, thanks to everyone that joined us today and for your great questions. We hope you enjoyed it. Please do share any feedback you have. You can email us at community@worth.com. Next week at Worth Live, for the next normal series on Thursday at 3 p.m. Eastern Time, we'll be talking about how technology is empowering women's health, with special guests Simone Tate, founder and CEO at Poppy Seed Health, Deborah Bass, CMO and president of Nuvo Group America, and Elizabeth Bailey, managing director at Ria Ventures, and Kathy Entwistle from Morgan Stanley. So please register online at worth.com/events. Please sign up for our newsletter on worth.com. And in the meantime, be kind to yourself and others, stay healthy, stay safe, and enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you, everyone.
Bye, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Good to see everybody.
Bye.
Same. Bye, guys.